Hey, boa tarde. Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is João Biehl. I'm a professor in the Department of Anthropology and also at the Woodrow Wilson School. And I'm delighted to co-direct the Brazil Lab, Luso Afro-Brazilian Studies, together with Pedro Meira Monteiro, who is currently on leave and sends his warmest and saudosos regards. We are fortunate to be able to implement the Brazil Lab initiative that takes Brazil as a critical nexus to think through larger problematics that affect people in Brazil and globally, from environmental predicaments to democratic insecurities and persistent inequalities at PIERS, the Princeton Institute for International and Regional Studies, and in synergy with the Program in Latin American Studies and various departments such as Anthropology and Spanish and Portuguese that also co-sponsor today's event, celebrating the Brazilian anthropologist Lilia Schwarcz's powerful book, Brazil, a Biography, co-written with historian Heloisa Starling. They write, ever since the arrival of Cabral and his fleet of caravels, Brazil has been a paradise for some, an endless hell for others, and for the rest, a kind of purgatory on earth. Quite timely. Despite these characteristics being identified with the past, they are still alive and well. Thus, Brazil's development was born of ambivalence and contrast. On the one hand, it is a country with a high degree of social inequality and high rates of illiteracy, whereas on the other, its electoral system is one of the most sophisticated and reliable in the world. In Brazil, the traditional and the cosmopolitan, the urban and the rural, the exotic and the civilized walk hand in hand. The archaic and the modern intermingle, the one questioning the other in a kind of ongoing interrogation. Lilia Schwarcz is professor of anthropology at the University of São Paulo and visiting professor at Princeton. Her main interests are the history of slavery, racial theories, the history of the Brazilian Empire, art in the post-colony, and the history of anthropology. She published numerous award-winning books on these themes, each one becoming an epistemic threshold on its own, and all of them together becoming a core reference in the social sciences and the humanities, which she so seamlessly traverses with her unique perspective and voice. 3 of her major works have been translated into English: Spectacle of Races, Scientists, Institutions, and Racial Theories in Brazil at the end of the 19th century, The Emperor's Beard, Dom Pedro II, A Tropical King, and now Brazil, a Biography, all published by Farah, Stroh, and Jerome. Lily and Heloisa write, this book does not intend to construct a general history of the Brazilian people, but rather opts for a biography as an alternative form of understanding Brazil in a historical perspective, to learn about the many events that have shaped the country and to a certain extent remain on the national agenda. A biography is the most basic example of the profound connection between the public and the private spheres. In order to understand Brazilians of the past, we have also to think of those that Brazil should or could have been. Since the publication of Brazil, a Biography, Lili also published Lima Barreto, Triste Visionário, a sad visionary of the tropics, and Dicionário da Escravidão e Liberdade, Dictionary of Slavery and Liberty, with Flávio dos Santos Gomes, both at Companhia das Letras, Brazil's most influential publishing house, which she co-founded with her partner Lilia Schwarcz, and it is now part of the Penguin Random House group. With her love for archives, photography, and all kinds of artistic representation, Lily has curated various exhibitions, like The Great Travel of the King's Library, Nicolas Antoine Tonnet, a French translation of the tropics, A History of Brazilian Photographies, Mestizo Histories, Childhood Histories, and most recently, Afro-Atlantic Histories, which she developed as a curator at MASP, the Museum of Modern Art of São Paulo, and at the Institute Tomi Otaka. And I will pass this on for you guys to see the incredibly important and visionary work that Lily is doing, blending the history of Brazil with traditional representations of Brazil and representations that Brazilians themselves, from the periphery of the country, the forgotten ones, are actually making and circulating and reimagining the biography of the country. Lily's honors are many, and deservedly so. She won at least 5 Jabuti Prizes, Brazil's leading literary prize. She was a Guggenheim Fellow, a John Carter Brown Library Fellow. She holds a command of the Brazilian Order of Scientific Merit, presented by the President of the Republic. She was a visiting professor at Oxford, Leiden, Brown, Columbia, and Harvard. And we are the luckiest to have had a little of Lily. And since she's so many, a little is so wonderfully much. Here at Princeton in the past decade, first as a global scholar, and we are very thankful for Jeremy for his pioneer work of internationalization, for creating this program, and really Lily was the greatest find we could have had. And she's a treasure beyond compare, and we are lucky to have her since at Princeton as a visiting professor in Spanish and Portuguese, the program Latin American Studies, and now also helping with the Brazil Lab. She is one of Brazil's most important public intellectuals. She was in the middle of the big debates before and after the election, and which is probably a next chapter of the biography of the country, and unexpected to a certain extent, right? And we can wonder why was it unexpected to a certain extent, and I'm sure Jeremy will dig into that. And she writes regularly for Brazil's top newspapers, such as Folha de São Paulo, Estado de São Paulo, and also for Nexo. So, and we are delighted to have with us Jeremy Adelman, the wonderful historian, Princeton historian, who, as I already mentioned, is responsible for creating this space for Lily to come to Princeton and Princeton to thrive through Lily and with Lily. Jeremy Adelman is the Henry Charles Lee Professor of History and Director of the Innovative Global History Lab. And Jeremy is the author of editor of many books, including The Path-Breaking Republic of Capital, Buenos Aires, and the Legal Transformation of the Atlantic World, and Sovereignty and Revolution in the Iberian Atlantic. His most recent book, Worldly Philosopher, The Odyssey of Aldous Hirschman, is a luminous chronicle of one of the 20th century's most original political and economic thinkers, and a great friend of Blas and sorely missed among us. Jeremy is currently working on the book Latin America, A Global History. He's also working on Earth, Hunger, a study of how writers and artists, diplomats and ecologists have been wrestling with the meaning of global interdependence and attitudes to strangers from the 1850s to the present. An award-winning author and teacher, Jeremy has shepherded many important institutional initiatives. He directed PLAS for many years and was also the founder of the Council for International Teaching and Research that I mentioned has one of its greatest outcomes to have chosen and supported Lily's appointment, first as a global scholar and then as a visiting scholar professor at Princeton. The format for today, Lily will talk to us about the book, and the origins of the book, maybe a little bit of the reception. It was a bestseller in Brazil in spite of being 800 pages book, which reads like a 200-page book, given her wonderful prose. But it was an incredible success in Brazil, and now translated into English. So she'll talk to us about the book. Jeremy will present some comments, an initial set of questions, and then we will open up to all of us to engage with Lily and the work, and then we will have a book signing. The book's out there, and we will invite you all to stay for a lovely reception and to continue the conversation. So let's give Lilia Schwarcz our warmest welcome back to your home.
I think I'm not going to talk now after this presentation. Okay. I want to thank João Biehl for this beautiful presentation, for our friendship, and Miguel Asmir for organizing this meeting. The idea of discussing the book I wrote together with Heloisa Starling that deals with this noisy character, Brazil, here in Princeton, is like using Oswald de Andrade's poem, an evidence that happiness is casting out nines. In Portuguese, a alegria é a prova dos 9. I also want to thank Jeremy Adelman. It's an honor to have you in this colloquium. In Portuguese, I would say, if you allowed me, chique do último. I also want to thank Gabriela and Plas for receiving me here again. And last but not least, the Brazil Lab, this essential initiative, mainly in this very difficult moment in the history of my character, in the history of Brazil. João asked me to talk just 15 minutes. I'm going to try to obey João. You know how he is, no? So I will do my best. So I thought it would be interesting to explain some inside histories inside the book, mainly that can help, as I cannot talk about 500 years, no? So in 2010, Penguin asked Companhia das Letras, a Brazilian publishing house, to submit a project of a book on the history of Brazil. As a publisher of Companhia das Letras, I was the one in charge to find the correct person. And in fact, I invited some historians. Oh man. One of them accepted the task and even presented a summary of the book, of the future book. But he gave up in the beginning of October, just on time for the Frankfurt Book Fair. That means trouble for me. I do not know if you can understand the consequences of this expression, sleeping with the enemy, but I was immediately hired and obliged to write this book. I must confess, I really did not want it, mainly because I was starting to write another book on Lima Barreto. I used to say I was pregnant of Lima Barreto, a famous black writer in the beginning of the 20th century of Brazil. But when I finally realized I had no other chance, I invited Heloisa Starling, a colleague and a close friend of mine from UFMG, University of Minas Gerais, and a specialist in some topics that I'm certainly not. So we divided the book in topics and chapters and agreed about common pillars of our arguments. Let me try to enumerate, to summarize some of them. First, we agreed that the slave system and the post-emancipation period, as we call the moment immediately after the Golden Law of 1888, was and still is one of the biggest contradictions of the history of Brazil. Brazil received 4.7% of the 12 million Africans that had to leave the continent. Brazil was also the last country to abolish the system and had enslaved all over its territory. On the other side, the Golden Law was a very conservative one and perpetuated a kind of racism that we call in Brazil a structural racism, even nowadays. Silence, naturalization of violence, denial of hierarchy, and inequality were, and still are, some of the attitudes one can find in Brazil as a character. Second, despite official depiction Brazilians like to sell for themselves and abroad, Brazil was and still is a very violent country. As a consequence, and an original historiography shows enslaved did fight for freedom in very different ways. Organized quilombos, insurrections, individual leaks, committed suicides, killed and poisoned landowners. Secondly, during colonial, imperial, and republican times, civil rebellions happening in different parts of the country, showing that Brazil is far from being a Pacific country. 3, Brazil was also a Portuguese colony for more than 3 centuries, and later on an empire surrounded by republics everywhere. Understand that specificity that even nowadays are part of our agenda was very important for us. For example, the Republican regime started with a double ato falho. Can I say failed act?
Slip tongue. Yeah.
How do you say it? You got it, ato falho.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like a word game.
Yeah. Ato falho. That shows how, even today, titles are very important for this new aristocracy of Brazil created during Empire. In 1889, the new vice president, Floriano Peixoto, sent a letter to the Minister of Justice explaining that from that moment on, there were no more titles of nobility in Brazil. But he addressed the letter to Barão of Rio Branco, that answered, I agree, positively, and signed Barão of Rio Branco. We also found in patrimonialism the use of public space as private ones, a common attitude of our character since colonial times. During the 17th century, there was a popular proverb that said, in Brazil, the one that steals a little, is a thief. The one that steals a lot is a barão. Quem rouba pouco é ladrão, quem rouba muito é barão. That's why another pillar of our biography, corruption. Corruption is the poison of the Republic, but entered in the state as a kind of common sense since colonial times. Another one, we knew we had to include very well-known characters like kings, governors, politicians, but we also wanted to write about anonymous leaders. Zeferina, for instance, the black leader of a very dangerous quilombo, the quilombo of Urubu, or João de Deus, the black leader of the Taylor's Rebellion, Rebelião dos Alfaiates, that once decided to parade in the streets of Salvador dressed like the heroes of the French Revolution. Both of them were assassinated by the state. Brazil is also a difficult character because sometimes he or she can be considered a very modern country, as João read, and sometimes a very traditional one. As Gilberto Gil sings in Parabólica Camará, from a raft takes an eternity, from a sloop an incarnation, and from a plane a missing time. O tempo de uma saudade. What else? Brazil is a very diverse country, compounded by more than 200 native nations. Black people coming from different parts of the African continent, European, Japanese, Chinese immigrants, and others, with different customs. And we really wanted to bring all this complex panorama to the book. As an historian and an anthropologist, I wanted to show that history is not just a combination of official politics with economic subjects. Talking about culture in a larger sense was our goal. That's why we included art, food, music, poetry, literature, cinema, sports, rituals. We eventually introduced our main intellectuals and interpreters as characters of the history. Talking about them, it was at the end of our writing that we noted that we had transformed Brazil into a character. Heloisa and I use it to refer to the country as a person. We use it to exchange comments like this. This time, he was a deception. Wow, we are very proud of him now. Then we noted that Brazil was converted into a kind of character with contradictions, hits and misses, great moments, terrible moments. Sometimes Brazil was very generous, sometimes he was very mean, as all of us. Soon after we published the book in Brazil, we started the process of selecting and working together with the translator in order to keep the style and the humor of the text, of our text. Since the beginning, our goal was to talk with a larger group of readers. but without transforming history in a common joke. On the contrary, we wanted to keep the criticism showing some roots of this political process that we are eventually facing today in Brazil. At the end of the process, our English and North American editors asked us to write a new conclusion. Ours was dated, was finished in the beginning of 2014, and we were, at that time, very enchanted with the public parades, das manifestações of the junho of 2013 that brought new items to our agenda. The gender question, the Black and Afro-Brazilian issues, the ecological questions, the manifestations of junho begged for the end of corruption, asked for a better public education and health program, and so and so. What we did not see at that time was that Brazil was profoundly divided, like two different avenues. We also did not notice a perverse process of corrosion of our political institutions. On the contrary, we wrote in the Brazilian edition, democracy is consolidated in Brazil. Republic has failed. So we decided that we would keep the original conclusion, because that was the temporality of the book, and write a kind of afterwards. It was a kind of epilogue or something like this. But this piece that we wrote, I think 6 months ago, something like this, was born old. We wrote about impeachment, the Dumas impeachment. It was very difficult to write. We wrote about the corruption in the heart of the state. It was very brave of us to tell this kind of things. We talked about the weakness of our institutions, but we could not predict the hurricane called Jair Bolsonaro that was coming. The president elected in Brazil in November of 2018. And then we concluded that democracy was not consolidated, and republic continued to be a problem and failed in Brazil. But that is another story, or a new chapter, as João said, that we will probably have to write in the near future. Time is running very fast in the history of the world, in our global history, and Brazil did not escape this kind of wave, the conservative wave. A conservative tsunami, or a very authoritarian democracy, invaded our common and different history. Right is to face challenges, and we have a new one just in front of us. Thank you very much.
Wow. I realize I sit between a more open conversation with you and everybody here. So I will try to be, I'll be brief. Thank you. It's always wonderful to be with you side by side. Let's say, reading Lilia Schwarcz is like having a book as a friend. And there's something always very personal about reading her books. I think I've read them all now. The characters, and they're not always just people. Sometimes they're libraries. Sometimes they're beards. Grow on you like friends. Whether it's Pedro II, Lima Barreto, photographs. Yeah. Mark Ferrez, the father of the photographer, makes an appearance in the biography. And actually, Lily, what João didn't mention, has experimented with other ways of creating visual narratives of Brazilian history. So there's a passage in the book in Brazil about Custodio's Bakery. It's a story by Machado de Assis called The Imperial Bakery. And one day, just as the Republic has been created, we'll talk about the Republic a lot, I think, this evening, Custodio has to have the painting outside his bakery repainted from the Imperial Bakery to the Republican Bakery. But he has to ask himself, well, what if the Republic fails? That word has already appeared on the table. Should he call it the Republican Bakery, and then he would have to repaint it? What about calling it the Government Bakery? But then what would the opposition say? They wouldn't buy his pastries anymore.
Yeah.
How about, and then there's a proposal, how about adding the date 1860 so that people would know that he had created the bakery when the empire existed? But this seemed very old-fashioned. And so there was a compromise to call it Custodio's Bakery. And the story ends with an observation that sometimes money has to be spent to change a name. And name changing is a running theme throughout this book. Word games, and we'll get to that in a minute. And the last line of this little passage is, but revolutions, says the narrator, always entail expenses.
Yeah.
I did all my graduate work in Great Britain and was taught very imperfectly the art of ironic detachment. But Lily has crafted a very special style of her own. It is the art of ironic attachment. To bring you in, but you can still laugh and wonder. So I have 3 sets of questions for you, and you can pick and choose and leave them on the table if you want.
Ask the others.
One is the question of Brazil. And one of the running themes of the book is the Brazilianizing of Brazil. The country as, I would slightly reframe it, as a kind of global experiment that carries with it so many legacies of the past that come up already: slavery, the colony, the ancient hierarchies and hopes, organized around sets of juxtapositions and tensions, right? Rather than being on the drive to one particular kind of history of the future, let's say. One is the relationship between strangeness and recognition, about how thinking about Brazil, becoming Brazilian, is like holding up a mirror, seeing strangeness and familiarity always at the same time. Mm-hmm. So one of the running themes of the book is about how one sees contrast and convergence. So a question for you on that is just to ask about your writing style, how you happened upon and how you wrestled with the challenge, you and Heloisa, of telling a story that way when we're much more familiar with kind of unidirectional modes of narration. The second, having to do with the question of Brazil, is about new ways of narrating. We've already mentioned, it's hard to avoid, that the challenges of how to describe, how to create, in a sense, in Mario de Andrade's formulation, a new language. So word games is a running theme. The naming of things, cacique, America, Cataguá, to denote the relentless search for gold after the extinction of Indians who lived in the El Dorado Mountains. And in fact, and I'm going to come back to this, the renaming or the contestation around the name of what happened in 1964 as a revolution or as a dictatorship, which I think is the cloud that's hanging over us now.
Yeah.
So how do you come up, make choices around words that themselves become contested. And part has to do with, in this particular case, it's hard to avoid, how to remember 1964 in one particular very present issue. Third in this question of Brazil is allegories. And one that it runs throughout the book is to metabolize. And the theme of cannibalism, or anthropology, the idea of swallowing other cultures and other bodies to create new ones, whether it's slaves or Indians, is a current in the book.
Yeah.
And the creation of allegories, like cannibalism, allegories, and they're very beautifully relayed in the book. I mean, it's one of the great things about reading it is you're not hit hard by big theories. One could very easily do that, but the stories relay the purpose. I already mentioned Marc Ferrez, who was this sculptor, French artist and sculptor, who was brought and comes in, this is around page 297 of the book if you're reading it, as a sculptor for a ceremony to create the artwork that will accompany the 1841 coronation of the emperor. And the story ends with this very funny line about how in the course of the festivities that French hairdressers were in short supply because so many of the aristocratic ladies were having their hairs restyled for the event. And that was an allegory for the pomposity of the effort to try to create a new Brazil, an imperial Brazil. So that's one set of questions. Second is around the question of the Republic. This is, I think, I don't want to, I feel a little ambivalent about this because there's so much of the book is so beautiful about the colonial and 19th century past, actually, that I fear that we careen so much towards the present. But the Republic looms very large. What's it like to read this book now? First, to remind ourselves, as the book does, that 3 presidents in a row were elected for 2 consecutive terms until these past elections. And so one could pardon your original conclusion, which ended on a, let's not quite, but getting close to euphoric note about the possibility of democracy as a consolidated, which was always somewhat at odds with the rest of the book, where nothing quite consolidates.
Yeah.
Right? That it's always a work in progress.
Agree.
Which is where we are now. The Republic as a construction, as an experiment, and the artists, the architects, the writers, the spectacles, like that go way back, in fact, in the construction of this thing. And there, the really very striking the themes of race, mixture, hierarchy, and the deep imprint on the imaginary of the Republic. A Republic without egalitarianism, constitutions with corruption that are so sewn into the fabric that one always has to think in terms of mixtures and not of purities. Even the national food, feijoada, which you note at some point in the book, that mixture denotes something about the country. But through it all, and we might think then about these historic conjunctures and the power shifts that occur, 1820s, 1890s, 1930s, 1960s, whether and each one ending with a story, Os Sertões being the most perhaps famous in the 1890s conjuncture, whether we are going to have to write a story about this moment as another one of these potential breaks, which raises questions about how much we think of the Republican post, say, 1964 to the present conjuncture as one whole, or whether we think 1985 really was such a break to create, something I'm going to come back to in just a minute, to create something new. Where do we mark these out? Part of what goes on here is the management of disappointment, which is not the same, since I work more on Argentina, which is about the management of chronic mourning, right? Of something that is lost. This is a rather different sense of melancholy, or meaning of melancholy. And Roberto Schwartz, who's cited here on the challenge of managing disappointment, is to resist the urge to start from zero all over again. Right? From that insight, what can we say about this present, about thinking about creating new beginnings, which is how I'm going to end. Mm-hmm. And so the book ends very ambiguously, with, in a sense, multiple endings that keep having to get re-scripted with each edition, because we don't know what to make of it, which leads to my last set of questions. So this will be really brief, which is the question of life. So João had asked me, wow, you're a biographer, so please comment on what it's like to tell a story of the life history of a country as opposed to a life history of a person. And I kind of scratched my head, what is the analogy between a person and a country? And of course, one thing that is different is, of course, how you handle the endings. And for Brazil, of course, the ending is our present. It's not of a death, which is what the normal ending of a biography does.
Yeah.
My favorite literary biographer, I highly recommend her, Hermione Lee, beautiful biography of Virginia Woolf.
Yeah,
and in fact reflects in an essay in one of her in her methodological collection, an essay called How to End It All. And she reflects on death, and she's, of course, concerned with Virginia Woolf's suicide. And I hope we can resist the temptation to call what's just happened in Brazil as a suicide. But what she notes is that most biographies are about the dead, right? They were about dead characters. We were writing their stories end with death, and with that the book ends. And we're always concerned about the tone of voice at the moment of the subject's death. But at the end of this one, of course, we don't have that. There's nothing quite so terminal. We don't end with death. The country is not dead. The experiment is not over. Right? Mm-hmm. But what does this ending say about the life? So what does our moment now invite us to reflect on, say, the last 500 years? Of course, we know that the set piece of endings are ripe with myths and inaccuracies, very often oozing with sentimentality. I know I succumbed to it in the Hirschman story. Mm-hmm. But you wrote, in the wake of June 2013, those fevered days, right? But if we look back, and now you would write a very different story, but if we look back over Brazil's history for 500 years, it, of course, has faced death many times before. And death in this particular case is also the making of something new. There was always something deeply ambiguous in, say, 1821, 1889. So the death of one empire, the death of another empire, the death of a monarchy, the death of the First Republic, the death, question mark, of the Second Republic, and the creation of that curious hybrid that you call a dictatorship, but we might remind ourselves now in the re-scripting of that story, every one of those despots was elected. Mm-hmm. That hovering between the old and the new, the emperor and the constitution, the despot and the ballot box, that there is a continuity and a new beginning. So how do we think about our ends? For those of you who don't know, I just opened my email box about an hour ago and caught, thanks to Lily, the Spanish edition of the New York Times today, where she has an op-ed piece, and she quotes someone to say that it's normal to lose elections in a democracy. It's what defines democratic life. What is not normal, or what is so shocking, is to lose democracy in an election. Yeah. So what is, if you were to re-script your ending about a new beginning now and invite you to think about what that would look like? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I have to say something, no?
Yes.
Okay, let me try to. About writing. You know? That's a good question, because Penguin wanted us to write a book about a book that would be not for specialists. They wanted a larger audience, a larger public. And also in Brazil, we have this probably is the same in the United States. I know it's the same, that we in the academy, we are always complaining and saying, oh, the journalists are writing our history. They do not have this right. And then this man is not, and then we never write. And we stay inside the walls complaining. And different from the United States, in Brazil, and correct me if I'm wrong, to be a public intellectual is not a compliment, it's a problem. You have to make it in a way that's a kind of secret. You know? When for example, I showed up in a TV program together with an actor from Globo, and I didn't want to say the story to my colleagues of department, so it was a kind of secret. And so one day I showed up in a meeting and they said, oh no, you faced Pedro II. How it was for you? How was the feeling? And it's very difficult to write this kind of book. And Heloisa and I, we said, okay, Heloisa worked in the Comissão da Verdade, Truth Commission in Brazil. She's an intellectual very important to discuss dictatorship, and she was very important recovering the documents from this moment on. And then we said, okay, let's do it, and let's do it in a good way. We have two great editors. Every time we try, and then they allowed us to write symbols just 10 times. For example, structures. Just 6 times.
The word structure?
Yes, reconfiguration. So we had a kind of manual of things that we could write, and the manual that was things we couldn't write. And you would write things like this for us. Oh no, this is too much Foucault for me. I do not deserve that. So they really, really were tough with us. No? And our English editor, because it was Penguin that edited, they were also very tough with us. But I have this thing that I like to joke. I like to be ironic, no? Ironic in a very critical way. And then Heloisa is also a very ironic person, and we tried to combine this, and it was very interesting the way we worked, because we divided the book, and we had some chapters in common, but some chapters that you can recognize. That's Heloisa, that's Lily, and we tried to, for example, Heloisa, we said Heloisa is a very funny character, and then once I noted that she was in love with Pedro I. I said, Heloisa, that's not possible, because every time I would say, Pedro I, that and that, and she said, no, you are not very, that's not true. Pedro I, that was a good constitution. I said, the constitution of 1823 was a good one, was a very modern one. I said, Heloisa, come on. So we had very good debates among us. And for example, when she read the chapter about the moment when Dom João arrived in Brazil, she said to me, and it was a very moving, she said to me, we can feel the movement of the boat in the chapter. And we really tried to do it. And when she wrote the book, the chapter about dictatorship, I said to her, go for it, Heloisa, we need it. And then when I wrote the chapter about the slave system, and she called me and said, you wrote that with your heart. That was your heart. And we were very funny, because Heloisa likes to work in the dawn, and I like to work in the mornings. So it was very funny the way, and we have very few hours to be together, because the way we worked was very different. The question I think if I got it, it's a very important question about how Brazil deal with recognition all the time. No? We started with the name of the country, no, Brazil, because it would be Terra de Santa Cruz, that it was the name the church selected. And then they came up with Brazil because of the wood because of the wood that they used for furniture and boats, and it was a question, an economic question, and they win. So the name was so important, and Brazil, and the wood had a kind of very red, how do you say, savor? Yeah. Yeah, yeah, and people would say that that was the devil in the earth. So the questions of names and the questions of recognitions were very strong in the country since the beginning. No? Recognition was a question because Brazil was a Portuguese colony surrounded by Spanish colonies all around. The question of recognition of having an emperor surrounded by republics everywhere was a problem all the time. The question of the first republic that we had, a coup d'etat, we have militaries, was really a problem. The questions of modernism, if we were modern or not, no? So we were completely right. So the idea of recognition is always a question. I studied Lima Barreto that said that Brazilians, that's why we said in Brazil, Shakespeare is a little different. It's not to be or not to be. It's to be is to be. No, ser ou não ser. Ser é não ser. To be is not to be. No, so because this idea of, and Lima Barreto called that bovarism. They said, Lima Barreto said, Brazilians are all bovarism. We are always waiting. Lima Barreto says to, we are like Robinson Crusoe, always waiting for the next ship. So this is a question that we tried hard to deal with, expectations, no? Word games, we talked about some of them. Now, I wrote an article about this at Nexo. Our Bolsonaro created a group, a team, he called a strategic team. One of them is the General Souto Ribeiro that taught the Brazilians that we did not had a coup d'etat. That 1964,
this is what you call 64.
64 was not a coup d'etat because during the military regime, petroleum was very important for the country and the price doubled. And then economy was very good, that he was not right, he was not correct. You know? And then I wrote, and a lot of Brazilians wrote, but I'm going to talk about my article. I wrote that coup d'etat is not a Brazilian expression, that we talk about a coup d'etat when you have a democratic regime and then you have another regime that is not democratic, and that this regime is going to put down the other one. So, but that's a problem in Brazil now, because if Souto Ribeiro is going to win, he used a very military verb. I'm going to eliminate the books that use this word. So that's very strong, no? This is a book that's probably we are not going to, I don't know, let's wait. I'm a very positive person, so I think they will not succeed, but I'm going to and another game important in the book, it's cannibalism and anthropology. When the first travelers arrived in the country, they called Brazilians cannibals, because they thought that they used to eat people because they were very hungry. They wanted to eat things. Even if you can see the images of the Jean Leillery, it's like a barbecue, no? So you have a lot of women eating like this. Please pass me that leg. Please pass me that hand. I want this hand. It's very funny how they try to translate in image this kind of. This was not they were not cannibal. They practiced a ritual, a very complex ritual that we call anthropology. No, that you do not kill because you want to eat. You kill because you want to eat the strong feelings of your enemy. And that's why the enemy is going to die, but challenging you all the time, because that's the only way to die. And the prisoner would say things like this: my aunt is going to kill is going to eat your father. My brother is going to eat your mother. So that's the way. And then those were people. That's good because we're talking about beginnings and endings. But this book starts with another beginning, because we talk about that when we start with Oswald de Andrade again, when he says that when the Portuguese discovered Brazil, the native people had already discovered happiness, you know? So we started talking about these people. Brazil was very much populated. The population in Brazil was, you could compare with Spain in this moment. And they were all connected in nets by anthropology. And then this kind of as you said brilliantly, word game became a kind of self-definition, you know? Oswald de Andrade used this kind of definition in the Anthropophagic Manifest. And even nowadays, if you think about theater in Brazil, cinema in Brazil, this idea of Brazilians being not cannibals, but anthropophagists is very important, like a people that like to eat the other and give back another thing. French hair dresses, yes, that I loved. Because I studied the day of coronation of Pedro II. And I studied how they had to dress up, how they have to have the hair like this, how people complained because they had hairdresses like 1 meter, so you couldn't see a thing because of the hair in front of you.
Well,
and
they had to install special structures
yes.
inside women's heads. Yeah,
well, that's a moment that we historians, we love, when we find this kind of thing, it seems like a detail, but it's so important because you give a flavor in your book, no? You give a kind of taste in your book. Democracy. It's very difficult. It was very difficult when our editor, the edition of the book was a nightmare because we had a translator that didn't, he wanted to rewrite the book. For example, he had very strong opinions, the first one. For example, he loved Gilberto Freire, and he wanted to rewrite the chapter. He said, we were not fair with Gilberto Freire, so eventually he rewrote the chapter. He loved Rio Branco. And he said, you were not fair with Rio Branco. Rio Branco have to come up, be in this book, like more 10 pages like this. And the footnotes were terrible. For example, we talked about the Malês rebellion, that it was a very important rebellion in Salvador, in the streets of Salvador, a very...
a slave uprising in the 1830s.
In the 1830s, João Reis, a very important historian, wrote about it. And it was like very, very, very important for Brazil. And then our translator put a footnote like this. This region of Recôncavo Baiano is the place where Maria Bethânia and Caetano Veloso were born. So things like this. So nothing to do with the book. So it was, and then it was a big discussion because I said, okay, you keep it, but you have to put this footnote, it's yours. You put your name, not my name. And then I'm going to put my name.
A dialogue inside.
It was a dialogue inside the dialogue. It was very interesting. And then, but I must say that he had very strong feelings about Brazil. And then, the other thing that's very strong with Brazil and talking about word games is race and color. How they played with colors and races during the sugar civilization. We played a lot with the idea of a sugar civilization, but it's the sugar civilization with the bitterness of the slave system, how you put together those things. It's not Casa Grande Senzala, no, Stanley, it's another thing. And how they played with names, even in that name, even in that time. The white of the sugar and the brown of the slaves, and the pure sugar was white, and the contaminated sugar was brown. So we tell a story using this kind of categories that are still nowadays very, 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 very contemporary. They are very contemporary in Brazil nowadays. I study a soccer game for more than 10 years. The soccer games happens in Heliópolis, and the name of the game is Black Against Whites. So Heliópolis is the biggest favela of South America. It's in São Paulo. And so in theory, you have 11 blacks players against 11 white players. But every year, they change places as they change socks. You know? And as I am a person there, like the professor, so they try to play with me. So last time, one of the players, that his name is Pneu, I don't know, Tire. You can imagine Tire plays for which group, no? And then Tire came to me and said, Lily, can you help me here? I want to play for the whites. I said, Tire, give me a break. You cannot play for the, no, I can't, because I bought a new car, and it's a nice car. I moved my house. I'm living in a better place in Heliópolis, and my wife is whiter. So things are changing in Brazil now, but it was very common to the people would play like this. With the civil movements since the 80s, I think the black movement, the things are changing, but people would play with colors. Feijoada that you mentioned, Getúlio Vargas, that it was a very populist president. Once they asked Getúlio Vargas, why feijoada is the Brazilian dish? Because Getúlio Vargas created a lot of new things in his, as he was a very populist, a very successful one. He, for example, he decriminalized capoeira, he decriminalized candomblé, and then he created some holidays. One was the race day, the other one was his birthday. And then he talked about feijoada. He said feijoada is a Brazilian dish because you see, the white of the rice is the white of the white people. The black of the beans is the black of the black people. The orange is yellow. So we are talking about the people that came from Asia. And the pepper is red. So we are talking about our native people. And then they asked Getúlio Vargas, and what about the green? And he said, oh, this is our forests. So always talking about colors. That's very important in Brazil. No? Brazil, the way you finish your speech was so beautiful. No? Roberto Schwartz said that Brazilians like to start from the zero. Every time we failed, every time we fall apart, we said, okay, let's do it again. You were right, a biography, in general, biography has an end. No, I didn't finish with the death. You didn't finish to do the...
No, but he's dying.
Yeah, they die. And I remember, yes, but when I wrote about Lima Barreto, I remember I was writing, and I think it was the most the saddest chapter I have ever written in my life. And Louis, my husband, he was sleeping and he came and I was crying like this. And he said, what happened, Lily? I think he died. I said, oh no, Lily, you know. I said, he died. But a country never, we did not die. And when we wrote our first conclusion, it was a good moment for Brazil. That's why Penguin wanted a biography of Brazil. There was a moment when I started teaching here 10 years ago that when we had remember that when we had I was here with you, you taught me how to do, I have a big group because Brazil was the one, no? He's the guy, no? Obama said to Lula, and everybody wanted to know the Brazilian secrets, no? So when
that's when we created the strategic partnership with USP.
By USP.
Even our president wanted to meet Brazil.
Brazil, and they went to Brazil. It was complicated.
And Lily opened her house to Shirley Tillman.
Shirley was there, yes. And then I remember.
Even Shirley wanted to go to Brazil.
And we had that terrible reitor, remember? We don't go by numbers. He said, we don't go by numbers. I said, what exactly you want to say that we don't go by numbers? Remember that? Wow. And then Brazil was like, and then 2014, we were in that, we had the manifestações de junho, that it was a very democratic way of being in the streets, parading in the streets, invading the streets, mainly in a country like Brazil that's different from Argentina.
Where the street was already, yes.
Yes, and different from Chile, I would say, different from Peru. Brazil is a very authoritarian country. I mean, the landlords, and then it's not like this, and people are not very much into politics. That's very much true. I don't know if it's the empire. I don't know if I have to blame the Portuguese. I don't know. But then what happened? When we finished that book, we were very, very positive. And we really thought that after the 80s, with the 88 Constitution, the citizenship constitution, we Brazilians thought, I was not the only one. We had a lot here. Mauricio, help me. We thought we made it. And we thought democracy was not a process. We thought that democracy was the end. That's the story. And we thought that the values that we had were the values for everybody. And we did not see this very conservative wave coming. And I know it's not just Brazil. I know what happened. I was here when Trump was elected. Probably I'm very bad luck, so because I was here and I was there. I give bad luck. And then we saw what happened in Poland. We saw what happened in we can see everybody. But in Brazil, I think that's what happened. And that the two major parties, like PT and PSDB, did not created a common group against Bolsonaro. And we did not see that there was this very strong anti-PT sentiment that Bolsonaro could gain this space. And we did not see when Bolsonaro went to Israel to take a bath, like Putin went to the cold waters. So we did not see this coming, and when it came, it was too late. When we wrote the afterwards, we were in another mood, as you can see. Dilma, we had the impeachment. It was, in my opinion, not all opinions, and General Ribeiro Souto is very much against, of course. It was a coup d'etat, no? And then the imprisonment of Lula, and then the car wash movement, that it was very important in the beginning against corruption, and then was very, very ideologies, in the middle of ideology. And now the Judge Moro is our future next justice minister. So how do you think about the new beginnings? I think we are trying to think about new beginnings, because one thing very important that happened between the first turn and the second turn is that civil society in Brazil, that normally are very passive, very, very passive in Brazil. We do not deal a lot with this idea of being a citizenship of the country. During this moment, it was very impressive how civil society tried to make what politicians refused to make. Fernando Henrique Cardoso, Lula, Haddad, Ciro Gomes, Marina, all of them. And then we created a lot of manifestations, we created a lot of ideas, we created a lot of movements. One of the most beautiful one was called Vira Voto. How can I translate this?
Vira voto would be turning
a vote.
Flipping a vote.
Flip a vote. So every one of us, we had to flip a vote, at least 3 persons in a day. And then we exchange stories.
To convert, yeah.
You have to convert. And so it was a good movement. I converted my brother, for example. Pedro Salles, like every day, and you enter in a Uber and you start talking with them. Okay, what do you think about Bolsonaro's projects and like this? And then I jog. I went to Ibirapuera and I converted some of them. So it was really, really, really. I'm a kind of Pollyanna, I know, but and we didn't succeed, but it was not a disaster because we thought that Bolsonaro would win like wow. And then one thing was important. Society showed that we can make it. As you had the elections just now, and it was such an important election. So for us, and I put it in my Instagram. Now I have an Instagram. Well, it's a very popular one. I need to. And I put the map of the United States, and I said, okay, you see, democracy is like this. Democracy is a process. It's not a final. And we have to keep fighting, and we have to keep trying. I think Brazilians, we wake up with another Brazil, with another responsibility, and I think some of us, we are trying to face it. It's not a good position, but it's a good place to be. No?
Thank you very much. Thank you. What we want to do now, we want to collect a series of questions. Let's go for the art of condensation to get more people now in the discussion. So let's collect a bundle, and then Lily, you don't need to answer necessarily all questions, okay, but you can kind of address some. Jeremy, feel free to kick
help me here.
So let's open up. Who wants to get started with a question or comment, or should I call it like, yes, Lorraine.
Okay. So first of all, thank you so much. This was really amazing. I'm definitely excited about it. So when some of us have been searching for a silver lining in the Trump election, I think one thing people were talking about was, well, at least it kind of finally shows people that racism is still alive and well, and we kind of have to give up the idea that we'd overcome that. And I wonder if maybe that's something you could say about Bolsonaro's rhetoric, and or if there's any other like silver linings that I know are hard to find, but if there's any other things you've thought about along those lines.
Yes, Jonathan?
Thanks so much for the talk. I was just wondering, the biography of Brazil continues like the biography starting of the nation state. I'm just wondering if you deal in the book with other cosmologists and indigenous groups that were there previous to the colonization and how they form part of your project.
Maybe.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you very much for this talk and questions. So I came here to the United States in 2008 when Obama was arriving and Brazil was rising, right? And then so exactly, I felt exactly what you said about this turning moment now. And so I have two questions. One is in relation to women movements, women presence. So talking about the last elections here in the United States, we saw the growing presence of women. And we have two women writing the Brazil biography. So how did you saw the Elinão movement of women arriving and then being criticized by creating a new kind of helping Bolsonaro? So how do you see this women presence and effect in the politics? Mm-hmm. And the second question is, what are your suggestions for us who work outside Brazil? How do you see the effectiveness of how can we help more from outside? The letters from the universities, the courses, what kind of suggestions do you have for us working outside Brazil?
Okay. Stan?
Well, I'll be brief. I'm going to be a bit of a wet towel. But let me put it this way. I'm going to make suggestions that I thought you have already treated or might. I must say by introduction that it's a pleasure to be at the arrangements you have made with one seminar or discussion group, João, and I think we deserve you a great deal of pleasure. I've been thinking about practical issues. Brazil today has one of the most extraordinary gaps between wealth and poverty in the world, not just in Latin America, but in the world. And when I went to Brazil in 1942, I thought it was going to be the terra da promissão.
Yeah.
It would be a land which would achieve certain stages of development. It's not been the case. So, apropos of your biography, I thought I'd think about, well, what were the things that I would concentrate on to try to understand Brazil today? So the first thing I came to mind, as we mentioned before, is slavery. Now we have to recognize that slavery lasted from 1540 to 1889 in Brazil. It's the last country to abolish slavery, and next to the last to abolish the slave trade. It received most of the slaves, well, I'm sorry, a large percentage of slaves that came to America. In other words, what you had here was a system of over 3.5 centuries of legitimate violence.
Yeah.
And I think that has to be emphasized as we're beginning to understand in our own country. The second is the role of the military. See, the military has been in the history of Brazil since if not before, since 1889 until 1985. Right? Repeatedly, they have been brought in to establish order. And then finally, in modern times, we have a development of a bourgeois class, which has been described as an authoritarian bourgeoisie, which includes, among other things, at the lowest level, what I suspect is the evangelicals, who are largely small businessmen, etc. And they want order and peace and no corruption. Now, in this last phase, it seems to me, there is something that I think should perhaps be answered. That is, you have created a civil, well, how should I put it, civil military government, people moving in and out of the government, which has a lot to do with the current situation. Viz. Bolsonaro, ex-captain in the military, also a representative in Congress. So these are the things that seem to me require more careful examination in order to understand Brazil. I don't want to, I'm sorry to throw a wet blanket, but I am disappointado.
Yeah, all of us.
Disappointed in the history of Brazil.
Yeah.
I must confess it.
All of us, yeah.
We get a second round soon, Lily.
How?
Get a few points and then we go to the next round.
Trump and Bolsonaro. I think we have some things in common and some things that are very much different. Brazil is the United States of Brazil. We don't have the autonomy of the states. So a president has a lot of power. That's very important. Second thing, Bolsonaro tried to be a president 4 years ago, and then he gave up. And then he was elected again as a congressman. No, can I say a federal deputy? Yeah. He was a federal deputy for 27 years, and so he had one agenda, very clear agenda, protecting militaries and attacking all kinds of minorities, women, blacks, LGBTs, all of them. He's not new, but he had a plan. So he created, different from Trump, that we can like or cannot like the Republican Party, but it's a party. PSL is not a party. It's a Partido de Empréstimo. It's like a...
It's a party for rental.
It's a party for rental. He created this party and he put a bunch of persons to be elected like senators, deputies, and that happened. So for people that say that he's dumb or something like, I don't think so. Cosmologists, we start the book with this. So that was a problem with the English edition because they wrote the cover, and the cover was very, very colonial. It was like this. Brazil was there waiting, this almost asleep giant, waiting for the Portuguese, and then suddenly the Portuguese appeared. Said, oh no, it didn't translate, so I thought the translator didn't translate the first chapter, because the first chapter is a whole discussion about cosmologies, about other kinds of histories, and we come back to the native people, black people, and to always, you're completely right, to talk about how complex is the society in terms of temporality, in terms of histories, what kind of history you can tell. So it's a very good question. Stan, we are all very much the same. You couldn't talk to me after some days, because we thought it would be different, and it wasn't. And it's true that we have militaries in 89. We had militaries in 1964 until the 80s. But then we had 30 years of democracy. And we have a beautiful constitution that is under fire now. A very modern constitution, a very inclusive constitution, because we are one of the worst country in terms of social inequality. And I always say that we cannot blame the slave system, because we are recreating inequality in our actual scene. So I always say that we know when it started, the post-abolitionist movement period, but we cannot say when it ended, because it's still happening in Brazil. If you go to our national census and data, you can see discriminations of blacks in the health, schools. We are killing one generation of young black people that live in the suburbs of Brazil. And it's not just Rio de Janeiro. The numbers are numbers of a genocide. And I think that Bolsonaro explains it. I wrote this article trying to put history to explain Bolsonaro, how Brazil still is a very conservative society, how Brazil still is a very racist society, how Brazil still is a very machista society. Women movements, they are becoming very strong in Brazil. We were good players in this moment. But when I arrived in this country, I have a driver from Minas, and he's completely Bolsonaro. I didn't want to talk to him, but as I am a vira-voto, I said, I'm going to vira-voto him. And he said things like this, oh, pouca vergonha, eh? Well, what a shame. You went to parade naked. I said, that's not true. But Bolsonaro, as Trump, he gives all this kind of fake news, and people believe. Bolsonaro gave 2 speeches when he won. One for the internet, and then he spoke freely, and he spoke against the communists and against the press, and another one for the nation that he read, and he used words like freedom, constitution, and democracy. I think he has 2 faces of Janus, no? And he shows these 2 faces. So it was very important. When we wrote this book, I received not 1 question, not 2, not 3. The journalists that would ask me, what's your sensation of being a woman and writing the history of Brazil? I said, why don't you ask this for a man? So that's Brazil. Bolsonaro is Brazil. That is our deepest deception stand. That's why I put together. He was elected by, first, we say Brazil is very divided. Brazil is very divided, but it's not so divided. Because if you count, first, we have 30%, more than 30% of votes, of Brazilians vote white, null, or abstentions.
For abstention.
So more than 30%. Then, if you count people that vote for PT, they are not all PT. You have people that are for PT, and then you have people that are much against Bolsonaro. And then if you think about Bolsonaro, you have the Bolsonaristas, we call them Bolsominions, minions, I was put in a blacklist by the Bolsominions. The first thing I said when the press interviewed me, I said, first, it's not a blacklist, it's a white list. Second, I'm going to put in my Lattes. Lattes is a curriculum in Brazil. And then I said, I prefer to be in this list, not in the other one. But even if you think about Bolsonaro, they are not all Bolsonaros. You have this loyal group that calls Bolsonaro as myth, supreme leader. It's terrible. I saw in the Paulista Avenue, supremacist white. So you have this kind of people. And you have the evangelical people that you mentioned, and it's very important. And you also have our elite, the financial area, that is very happy with Bolsonaro. Then, but not all of them voted for Bolsonaro. Some of them voted against Lula, against PT. And we are in a moment in Brazil that everybody that is for Haddad or for PT is a communist. And Bolsonaro said, not in the official speech, but in the other one, that he's going to put in exile or in jail all these people, all these leftist people that are dirty as the women, that are very perverse and degenerate. We are all very much depressed, as you were here. But I'm trying hard to talk with my students that are I think we have a responsibility now to give hope, you know? To try to say to people, we have to fight. That's a very important moment for us to fight. You know? Depression is our name now.
So we have Emmanuel, and then Vinicius. Let's get a second round. Yes, and then in the back. Yes. Then Mauricio. Yes, and then yes. Emmanuel?
I wanted to, you talked to us a little bit about the historian behind writing the book. And I guess my question is there an anthropological side to it too? Is there, in other words, are there native concepts there that unsettle the idea of what it is to be a country and to have a national history? And
Mauricio?
Hi, Lily. Thanks, Jeremy. I just was wondering about your concern with some historical tradition at the University of São Paulo. I think because you are very concerned with the Brazilian social thought. So I'd like to hear from you how do you frame the structure of your book in comparison with classical books like Boris Fausto or even like Caio Carajuba, especially in terms of the importance of the work as category and class.
What, the class and?
Labor history, labor.
Class and labor, yes. Thanks.
Oh, yes, please.
So you have already talked a little bit about the fake news and this post-truth era.
So she's asking about fake news.
Yeah, fake news and post-truth and how this contributed to Bolsonaro's election. And I think this has a lot to do with the ending of concepts such as democracy and dictatorship. I'm saying that dictatorship was a movement and not a dictatorship in itself. And I'm thinking about this poses new challenges for defending the humanities in Brazil. And also another issue that is, I think, really concerns us all right now is the surveillance of professors and teachers and the censorship and the idea that students should be making videos of what teachers and professors say in classrooms. If you could say a few words about that. And the second question is about the role of curatorship as a work of resistance right now. I know that I've heard you talk about Histórias da Sexualidade before and how challenging it was for you. Because another thing that's happening with Bolsonaro right now is the co-optation of morals, like pautas morais.
Yeah.
And So
right.
having an exhibit like Histórias da Sexualidade and Histórias Feministas, right, that's coming up. So,
It's coming up.
yeah, so if you could talk a little bit about that and about art commissioning as a way of reimagining Brazil's biography. So I'm thinking of Danton Paula Zeferina, right, and
Yeah.
João de Deus Nascimento.
Tell you also.
And so, and thank you for your work.
Okay. What? Yes.
I moved to Brazil in 2009 to work as an international consultant for government institute. Before I moved down, I learned to speak Portuguese. I traveled to 7 Brazilian states. I tried to immerse myself in Brazilian culture. I had a girlfriend in BH. I did everything I could do to learn about Brazil, and I moved down. And when I moved down, I thought, I really understand Brazil. And the cultural differences that I found, like the word huge is like that big. If I try and explain those differences. The differences were incredible. So my question for you is it ever possible, ever, that the United States could understand Brazil and Brazil could understand the United States? And I guess that versus
Okay. So I have a question too, and then we'll continue the conversation over, over the reception and book signing. So I think my question is also about, do you see now the book as also an epilogue of sorts, of a certain time, of these 30 years? That was a little bit built in Jeremy's question. A time, okay, we have democracy, right? We have 30 years of democracy. We have a strong culture of human rights. We have a very progressive judiciary until Moro appeared, right? We have an independent public ministry, which is a rare feat of any society where you have a public ministry like a fourth power, which can actually hold governments, even the president, accountable, something that doesn't exist in this country, for example, as a political institution. And somehow, how do you see historically, you already mentioned the big ideas, the military, the slavery, but the morality, that is at the core of the support for Bolsonaro, There is an anti-PT, but there is a core issue of morality that galvanizes people. And in that sense, it's not so different from what happens in the United States as well. How did intellectuals miss this question of morality, the genealogy of the morals, so to speak, in late 20th century, early 21st century capitalism?
Yeah. Then you ask this question, and I'm saying, you have just a few minutes to answer all of them. Biography. Biography was a challenge. We do not think it's really a biography. It's not, I think biography, you never write a definitive biography. Every time you put an ad, Jeremy, in a biography, you have to be prepared that a person will come and say, I found a new document. When I wrote the biography of our king, of the biography of Toné, or the biography of Lima Barreto, I said so. I think a biography is interesting, and it connects with João's question, because I think that every biographer use new questions to come back to the same biography. Better saying, I think Lima Barreto, for example, had a beautiful biography in the 50s by Francisco de Assis Barbosa. In fact, I finished the book introducing Francisco de Assis' biography in the biography of Lima Barreto. That's the end of the biography. And I say that the questions I raise, I asked Lima Barreto about race, about gender, about region, about class, because those were the questions of my generation. I grew up dealing with civil rights, so I asked Lima Barreto about my questions. So history is like this. History is the son of the time, Legoff would say, because we use our questions to old objects. So in this sense, the biography of a country, it's the questions we are asking to this country, and it's not biography is not really, you do not have to use the evolution as a category in a biography, and certainly a biography is not an exercise to glorify something. A good biography is a biography that keeps ambiguity, keeps contradiction, keeps the problem. So in this sense, it's a biography. And then we didn't want to write the conclusion, even in the Brazilian edition, because you know that it's not anthropologists I'm going to talk about, but historians, they have a lot of problems with talking about the present. No, they say, no, the present is not a process. And even when we wrote the book, we finished the book with the election of Lula, because we wanted to finish a process. We said, then when Lula is elected, we have a process that is finished. We're not saying that that's the end of the story, that that's the end of the story we could write at that moment. So it's a biography in this sense. It does not have an end. I think we are going to have to add new chapters, and that's the beauty of the thing. You know? But on the other side, it's the question of Vini, because you can think about a nation as Anderson says, as a community of sentiments. You know, we use it to think about words, about stereotypes, about internal myths, as forms of dealing with this character, forms of dealing with the nation, giving back to the reader things he knows. So this is a very anthropological way of dealing with this. We had a lot, Heloisa is not an anthropologist, so he had a lot of problems, and it was the best thing of the book. For example, when we wrote the beginning of the chapter about modern age, so we agreed we are going to talk in 2 pages about the French Revolution, because the French Revolution showed man there was not a divine king. That we were going to talk about the North American Revolution, because show it to the world that a colony can be independent. And then we were going to talk about the English Revolution, that showed that men do not have to live in the same state. Then I came up and I said, and I want to talk about the revolution in Haiti. And she said, no, that's not true, because it was not a modern revolution. I said, why not? She said, no, because it's not like this. I said, no, it's like this, because the revolution in Haiti showed that a slave do not have to be a slave forever. And it was we had this kind of discussions all the time. We have a chapter about how Getúlio Vargas manipulated culture in the sense of being more popular. But that was a big discussion, because Heloisa said, no, don't mix the things. We are talking about politics here. Getúlio Vargas is enough to talk about politics. I said, no, we have. So that was a good part. And we put all the theory, the bibliography in the notes. They allowed us to put it. And if you have a look, mainly in the Brazilian edition, there is a battle between the two of us. And it was a very interesting one.
But there is, I should say, I mean, one of the important dimensions of the book is the history of Brazilian, this is the mirror effect, Brazilians conceptualizing themselves.
Yeah.
One could call it an intellectual history of Brazil. I think that's not accurate, but there's a lot of theorizing as a way of thinking about what Brazil is, and so there's an internal dialogue with writers, social scientists, photographers, all the time through the book, both to denaturalize the categories that have been invented, but at the same time to say that part of the experiment is to create the categories to understand the life that people have.
Yeah, so Jeremy answered your question, because Gilberto Freire is a character inside the book. Euclides da Cunha is a character in this moment.
And creates words and categories that then...
The idea of sertão. Right. So we start talking about sertão, but not in the sense that Euclides da Cunha explained to us. Okay, Brazil cannibalized Euclides da Cunha with the idea of sertão and created Minas Gerais as the deep sertão, you know? And Belo Horizonte by night is so that was a big difference with Caio Prado, with both, for example, Boris Fausto. Also, culture was a very different from Boris Fausto. One journalist asked me, I love the book in the moments when you are not an historian. I said, when I'm not an historian? When you talk about theater, movie, paintings, photographs, this is not history. I said, yeah. So that was brand new. And then also, Caio Prado, it was very important. It's a very important book, how he showed what the meaning of being an open economy, in the sense that a colony has to serve to the metropolis. And a colony is always a colony. It's not something that you are going to have an evolution and become a metropolis. That was very important. And I think Heloisa is a very traditional historian in a good sense. And then questions of class, and so mainly tensions of class, they are very important in the book. I hope we succeeded, Mauricio, but we tried hard, you know. And then we asked Boris Fausto to write our, how do you say the comments in the blurb. He said, oh no, that's not fair, but he wrote, and he said exactly this, you know. They tried, and then they blame us that we did not talk a lot about soccer. That was, women, but it's there, it's there. And it's not like I am a Corinthiana and I did not say it's the best one in the world. You know? Democracy and fake news defining very good questions. I think I ended saying that I think our new challenge is to redefine democracy. No, I think democracy is a concept that we have to redefine now. We have to think about it because in Brazil and the United States, Bolsonaro, he is using the tolerance that we have in our constitution against us. So he's saying all the time, I'm a very democratical one. I won in a very democratic way. So how you deal with this kind of categories now, those are challenges that you were right, we have to face now. Marilia had, I forgot, is how you can help. That's very difficult because you saw that all the foreign press, they were against Bolsonaro. And Bolsonaro just said in one sentence, Bolsonaro has he has one intellectual, Olavo de Carvalho, that he follows as a myth. And Olavo de Carvalho says that the program of the left wing in Brazil is very much Gramsci. So that we, the left people, we want to gain education, culture, and then we are going to have power. And then Bolsonaro put Gramsci in his program, his official program. We are going to eliminate Gramsci from our schools. I said, okay, I have a friend that is a specialist in Gramsci. I said, okay, I'm going to visit you in the prison. And he said, no, I'm going to
write some more notebooks.
The notebooks about Gramsci. So, and then that's Bolsonaro. So he said, the problem of the foreign press is that the Brazilians, the left people from Brazil, they are as Gramsci. They are using the press, and they are going to discover, they are going to realize that we are very good. How you can, for me, the people that are really fragile in this moment are minorities. They are going to suffer. I am, all of us, we are very worried about LGBT people, and then very worried about the women movement. Very worried about black movement. We just passed, USP was the last one to pass the quota system. And then now I don't know how we are going to defend this. Bolsonaro wants to intervene in the names of the deans now. And the poor people, they are going to suffer.
And the Amazon.
I was going to say the trees. Bolsonaro said he's not going to respect the native land that is in our constitution. He's going to find a space to cut it. He's very much against terras de quilombo. That he said that's not. I'm very equal. I'm for democracy, so everybody is equal. Indian people, they are equal. Black people, they are equal. So they do not deserve to have land. So that's very much a problem. And you mentioned I think the academics, we are protected in a way because of our students. But professors that are suffering a lot are professors in schools, because we are reading about kids that are 11 years old that are filming the teacher and saying he's a perverse. We are
middle schools. There's a lot of surveillance in the middle schools and prohibition of discussing certain topics.
Yeah, the judiciary has a very important role, and they voted against it. That was very important. So maybe judiciary will wake up. Maybe, I hope so. And museums, curatorship. It's a very difficult moment. I am a curator at MASP, that is a private institution in a public space. So we can suffer because it's a public space, but it's private money. We suffered a lot with this sexuality histories. It was a good debate at the end, because they wanted. I don't know if you know about it. We had problems in the south of the country. Then we had problems in a museum at São Paulo, and then it was the moment that MASP was going to open this exhibition called Sexuality Histories. That was ready for a long time. Gabriela knows, to put together 600 works, you cannot do it like this. And then our lawyers, they said, either you have to forbid the exhibition for 18 years old, even the catalog. I put in my lattice, the catalog is forbidden for 18 years old. Or you are going to reduce the exhibition in 60%. So we opened the exhibition saying it's forbidden for 18 years old. That was the beginning of this very conservative wave. And then in the opening of the exhibition, we had 8,000 people, 4,000 against us, 4,000 for us. And then we said things like this: please help us. Civil society, you have to help us, suit us, ask us to open. Then in the first week, we received 4 ações legais, legal to close the exhibition. We didn't close because it was forbidden for 18 years old. And then after a month, everybody forgot about it. And a judge coming from the interior of Piauí sent a petition, saying that that was illegal, that we had to open the exhibition. Then we opened. So I think the art. Mário Pedrosa, that is a critic art that I like very much, he says, in moments of crisis, be close to an artist. I think that we have to be close. We are going to open the feminist histories, we are going to open the native histories now. You think what to do, And then just to finish, every book has its own temporality. I think that this is a book with a temporality. We tried to avoid it when we talked about the cosmology, when we talked about perspectivism in the first chapters, in the second chapters. We tried to avoid when we talked about sugarcane. We tried to avoid when we talk about coffee plantations, and Stan is very important for our chapter. We try to avoid when we talk about the coup d'etat in 64 or in 89. But then when you write about your present moment, that's very much difficult, But I think that's why we kept the conclusion. Because we kept the conclusion because you think, that's history, That's history.
It's
And
a
then-
very good reminder that the book was written in a moment.
Yes.
And
it's
imagination.
and imagination.
And how important imagination is.
And then it's a way to say we were wrong. It's so important to say it's wrong what I wrote 2 years ago. And we wrote that. We were wrong. No?
Well, you were overconfident.
Overconfident. Thank you so much, Jeremy.
A reminder that next week, a wonderful follow-up conversation on religion and violence in Brazilian politics, an event that Mauricio and Benjamin are organizing with the wonderful Renilson Pacheco, Juliana Victoriano, and the event will be are they here? Yes. Oh, excellent. So, vamos ouvir vocês semana que vem, então. Okay, so we have a wonderful conversation with Renilson and Juliana on religion and violence in the Brazilian political moment. And then on Friday, next Friday, another treat. Now what? Brazil under Bolsonaro, with our own Emilio Fraga and Jeremy, who became an operário, like an honorable member, but an operário of Brazil.
Wow.
Will be a discussion.
I want to apply for the postdoc.
Okay. So this said, this was a treat. Lilia Schwarcz.
Thank you.
What a pleasure to hear you. Jeremy, thank you.